I came home from the funeral with a secret inheritance of $18 million in my pocket, and I was ready to save my son from financial ruin. I stood outside his front door, my heart pounding, with the joy of a father who could finally be the hero. I was about to burst in and tell him and his wife that our days of struggle were over, that I had inherited 2 vineyards and a mansion in Malibu. But then I heard their voices through the thin wood of the door. They were laughing. And what I heard next sent chills down my spine and froze my hand on the doorknob. My name is Harrison Thorne. I am 74 years old, and for 50 years I poured concrete and framed houses in the bitter winds of Chicago, until my back gave out and my knuckles swelled to the size of walnuts. I thought I knew what cold felt like, but nothing prepared me for the chill of standing alone at my brother Leonard's grave. The gravedigger leaning on his shovel, waiting for us to leave. And me. I looked around the empty cemetery, hoping against hope to see a familiar car roll up. I had called my son Brandon 3 times. I had texted his wife Tiffany the time and location. I told them that Uncle Leonard had passed, and that it would mean a lot to me if they came. Just for an hour. Just to stand by me so I wouldn't have to say goodbye to my only brother alone. But the only response I got was the wind whipping the rain against my face. They didn't come. They didn't care. To them, Leonard was just the crazy uncle who moved to California 20 years ago and never sent birthday cards. They called him a failure because he didn't drive a luxury car or post flashy photos on social media. The priest closed his Bible with a definitive snap, basically telling me to hurry up. I placed a single white rose on the cheap pine casket. It was the best I could afford with my pension checks. I touched the rough wood and whispered, "I am sorry, Leonard. I am sorry I wasn't there more. I am sorry they left us both here in the rain." The starter motor whining in protest before finally coughing to life. I patted the dashboard. "Just a little longer, old girl. We just have to make it to the lawyer's office." I almost didn't go. I wanted to go home, crawl into my small back room at Brandon's house and sleep for a week. What was the point? Leonard probably left me a box of old letters or maybe a collection of classic rock vinyl records. But the letter from Mr. Caldwell, the executor, had been insistent. Immediate presence required. The law firm was in a glass skyscraper downtown, a place where men in suits that cost more than my truck looked at me with thinly veiled disgust as I squeaked across the marble floor in my wet shoes. The receptionist wrinkled her nose slightly as I approached the desk. My suit was 20 years old, a bit too tight around the middle now, and it smelled like wet wool and mothballs. "Mr. Thorne, Mr. Caldwell is expecting you." She said it like she was surprised I could read the sign. I was shown into a corner office with a view of the city skyline that looked like a postcard. Mr. Caldwell was a sharp man with silver hair and eyes that didn't miss a thing. He stood up and shook my hand firmly, ignoring the calluses and the dirt under my fingernails. He poured me a cup of hot coffee, and for the first time that day, the cold began to recede. "I am sorry for your loss, Mr. Thorne. Leonard was a remarkable man," Caldwell said, sitting down and opening a thick leather folder. I nodded, wrapping my hands around the warm ceramic mug. "He was a good man, a quiet man, my family. Well, they didn't really understand him. They thought he was struggling out there in California." Caldwell paused, his hand hovering over a document. "Struggling. Is that what they thought?" A small smile played on his lips. A smile that said he knew something the rest of the world didn't. He slid a piece of paper across the mahogany desk toward me. "Leonard was a very private individual, Mr. Thorne. He lived simply. He drove an old truck, much like yours, I suspect. But Leonard was also one of the shrewdest land investors in the state of California. He bought land in Napa Valley 30 years ago when it was just dirt and rocks. He bought coastline in Malibu when nobody was looking." I looked down at the paper. It was a summary of assets. My eyes are old, and I usually need reading glasses, but the numbers on that page were big enough to see from space. Total estate value, $18,400,000. The room spun. I actually gripped the edge of the desk because I felt like the floor had tilted. I looked up at Caldwell, waiting for the punchline, waiting for him to tell me this was a joke or that there was millions of dollars in debt to subtract. This is... I couldn't even finish the sentence. "It is all yours, Harrison," Caldwell said softly. "The 2 vineyards in Napa, the property in Malibu which is currently valued at $7 million alone, and the liquid cash in the investment accounts." Leonard's will was very specific. He knew your family situation. He knew you were the only one who treated him with respect. He left it all to you. Sole beneficiary. I sat back in the leather chair, the air leaving my lungs in a rush. $18 million. For a moment, I didn't think about buying a new truck. I didn't think about traveling the world or fixing my knees. My first thought, the thought that made tears prick my eyes, was Brandon. My son, Brandon. My boy. He was drowning. I knew it even though he tried to hide it. He was 40 years old and still chasing get-rich-quick schemes that always ended in disaster. I knew he was behind on the mortgage. I knew Tiffany, his wife, was maxing out credit cards to keep up appearances with her friends. I knew they were stressed. I told myself that their coldness to me, their impatience, was just the stress talking. Poverty makes people hard. Fear makes people mean. I had forgiven them for missing the funeral before I even left the lawyer's office. With this money, I could fix him. I could pay off the house. I could set up a trust fund for the grandkids they kept saying they couldn't afford to have yet. I could be the father who finally provided the safety net I never had. "There is a condition," Mr. Caldwell said, interrupting my daydream. "Leonard stipulated that the transfer of assets takes 72 hours to clear due to the complex nature of the agricultural trusts. Until then, he strongly advised, and I am echoing this advice, that you keep this inheritance confidential. Do not sign anything. Do not make any promises. Just go home and wait for the funds to clear on Friday." I nodded, putting the documents into a thick manila envelope. "I can do that." Friday. Just 2 days. I walked out of that building a different man. The rain was still falling, but I didn't feel it anymore. I felt 10 feet tall. I sat in my truck, and for the first time in years, I wasn't worrying about how to pay for gas. I patted the steering wheel. "We are going to be okay, old girl. We are all going to be okay." The drive back to the suburbs usually felt long and tiring, but today the miles flew by. I stopped at a grocery store and bought 2 expensive ribeye steaks and a bottle of good red wine. I wanted to celebrate. I wouldn't tell them the exact amount yet. I would just tell them that Leonard left me a little something, maybe enough to pay the mortgage, just to see the relief on Brandon's face. I wanted to see my son smile at me like he used to when he was a little boy, and I brought him ice cream. I pulled into the driveway of Brandon's house. It was a modest 2-story house that needed a fresh coat of paint. The gutters were overflowing, and the lawn was patchy. I looked at it and saw potential. I would hire a crew next week. We would fix the roof. We would plant a garden for Tiffany. I would make this house a home again. I grabbed the grocery bags and the heavy envelope tucked securely inside my jacket. It was barely 5 in the afternoon. Usually the house was quiet at this time. Brandon would be brooding in his office, and Tiffany would be scrolling on her phone in the living room, ignoring me. But as I stepped onto the porch, I heard something strange. Music. Jazz music playing softly. And laughter. I paused. Brandon was laughing. Not a cynical chuckle, but a full belly laugh. And Tiffany was giggling. It sounded like a party. I smiled. Maybe they had received good news too. Maybe Brandon closed a deal. This was perfect. We could celebrate together. The universe was finally aligning for the Thorne family. I reached for the door handle, my hand trembling slightly with excitement. I was about to turn the knob. I was about to walk in and change our lives forever. I looked down at my muddy shoes. I felt the thick envelope against my chest. The inheritance that could solve every problem they ever had. The lifeline I was rushing home to throw to them. I didn't open the door. I couldn't. If I opened that door right now, I would have killed him. I would have taken my bare hands, the hands that built skyscrapers, and strangled the ungrateful life out of him. Instead, I took a step back, then another. I moved silently the way I used to move on construction sites when I didn't want to wake the owners. I walked back to my truck and sat inside. I stared at the front door of the house that I had paid the down payment for 10 years ago. They wanted to play a game. They wanted to pretend. They wanted to trick the old man because they thought I was weak. They thought I was stupid. I reached into my jacket and pulled out the summary of Leonard's estate. $18 million. I wiped the rain from my face, but I didn't wipe the tears because there were none left. My sadness had died the moment Brandon called me pathetic. All that was left now was a cold, hard resolve. I started the truck. I wasn't going to tell them tonight. No, that would be too easy. If they wanted to play the game of secrets, I was going to win it. I would go inside. I would eat their food. I would listen to their lies. And I would wait. Because tomorrow I wasn't just going to be an old man with a bad back. Tomorrow I was going to be their worst nightmare. I pressed my ear against the cold, damp wood of the front door, and the world seemed to narrow down to the sliver of light leaking from the jamb. My hand was still hovering over the brass knob, a knob I had installed myself 10 years ago, when I helped them renovate this porch. Inside the house, the clinking of crystal glasses continued, a sharp and cheerful sound that felt like a needle in my ear. I expected to hear them worrying about me. I expected Brandon to be asking Tiffany if she had heard from his father, if the funeral went well, or if I was driving home safely in the storm. Instead, I heard the unmistakable sound of a cork popping, followed by the fizzy rush of champagne being poured. Finally, Babe Tiffany said, and her voice carried a lightness I had not heard in years, "I thought he would never leave today. The house smells like Old Spice and Bengay every time he walks through the living room. I have been spraying Febreze for an hour, just to get the scent of failure out of the curtains." I flinched. The scent of failure. That was what she called the smell of the muscle rub I used for the arthritis I got building houses for families like hers. Brandon laughed, a sound that lacked any real warmth, but was full of relief. "Don't worry about it, Tiff. It is almost over. Did you get the confirmation from the facility?" I held my breath, waiting for him to say the name of a rehabilitation center, or maybe a nice retirement community we had discussed once or twice in passing. "Sunny Meadows faxed the paperwork an hour ago," Tiffany replied, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "They have a bed open in the state-subsidized ward. It is perfect, Brandon. It is literally the cheapest option in Illinois. The brochure says they have a garden, but I looked at the reviews, and apparently it is just a patch of dirt where the inmates can smoke. But who cares, right? It is not like he is going to be playing croquet. The inmates." She called the residents inmates. My stomach twisted into a knot so tight, I thought I might throw up the coffee I had with Mr. Caldwell. Sunny Meadows. I knew that place. I had driven past it once, a grim brick block surrounded by a chain-link fence that looked more like a minimum security prison than a home for the elderly. But Tiff, Brandon said, and his voice dropped, a little lower, hesitation creeping in. "Are you sure about the timing? If we move him too fast, people might talk. The neighbors see him coming and going." "Let them talk," Tiffany snapped. The sweetness gone, instantly replaced by the steeliness of a woman who wanted what she wanted now. "We are drowning, Brandon. You told me the loan sharks are giving you until Friday. We need that $400,000 from his house, and we need it yesterday. Once he signs that power of attorney tomorrow morning, He is legally incompetent. We dump him at Sunny Meadows by noon, listing him as a dementia risk so he cannot check himself out. Then we list his house on Zillow by 1 o'clock. I leaned my forehead against the siding of the house, letting the rain mix with the cold sweat on my face. They had it all mapped out. It was not a sudden decision. It was a heist. And I was not the victim, I was the vault they needed to crack open. And think of the budget. Tiffany continued, her voice pitching up with excitement again. With him gone and the house sold, we pay off your stupid gambling debt, and there will be plenty left over. I saw this vintage Hermes Birkin bag on eBay. It is an investment, Brandon. I deserve it after dealing with his moping around here for months. A Hermes bag. She wanted to trade my life, my freedom, and the house I built with my own hands for a purse. Brandon sighed, the sound of a weak man surrendering to a stronger will. You are right. You are always right, babe. He is so out of it lately anyway. Half the time I don't think he knows what day it is. We are doing him a favor, really. He won't have to worry about bills or maintenance. We are simplifying his life. Simplifying my life. Is that what they called stripping a man of his dignity and locking him away to die in a room that smelled of urine and bleach? A sharp pain shot through my chest, radiating down my left arm. For a second, I thought this was it. The heart attack that would save them the trouble of driving me to the nursing home. I gasped, clutching the fabric of my wet jacket. But as I breathed through the pain, I realized it was not my heart failing. It was my heart breaking. And then just as quickly as it broke, it hardened. It turned into a stone-cold weight in the center of my chest. I could have kicked the door down. I still had the strength for that. I could have stormed in there, thrown the $18 million inheritance papers in their faces, and watched them scramble to apologize. I could have screamed at Brandon, asked him how he could betray the man who sold his own wedding ring to pay for his college tuition. But I didn't. Because if I went in there now as the angry father, they would just see a senile old man having a tantrum. They would use my anger as proof of my dementia. They would call the police claiming I was violent and unstable, and that would fast-track me straight to the psych ward at Sunny Meadows. No. I needed to be smarter. I needed to be the strategist Leonard always said I was. I slowly took my hand off the doorknob. I stepped back silently, my wet shoes squelching softly on the porch mat. I retreated down the steps, moving backward into the shadows of the driveway like a ghost. I climbed back into the cab of my truck and closed the door as quietly as I could. The silence inside was deafening. I sat there in the dark, the rain drumming a chaotic rhythm on the roof. My hands were shaking so bad I had to grip the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white just to stop them. They are celebrating, I whispered to the empty dashboard. They are drinking champagne to celebrate the end of my life. I looked down at the thick envelope in my jacket pocket. The inheritance. If they saw this, if they had even a whiff of the $18 million, the plan would change instantly. They wouldn't send me to Sunny Meadows. Oh no. They would treat me like a king. They would bathe me, feed me, and pamper me right up until the moment I signed the money over to them. And then I would have an accident. A fall down the stairs. The wrong pills mixed in my drink. I could not let them find this. I looked around the cab. The glove compartment was the first place they would look if they snooped. Under the seat was too obvious. My eyes landed on the rubber floor mat on the passenger side. It was caked with dried mud and grease from years of visiting construction sites. Nobody touched that mat. Tiffany wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole. I lifted the heavy rubber mat. Underneath, the carpet was worn and stained. I pulled a small knife from my pocket and carefully slit the carpet along the seam near the door. I slid the manila envelope deep inside the body of the truck, between the carpet and the metal chassis. I smoothed the carpet back down and threw the muddy rubber mat over it. Perfect. To find that money, they would have to get their hands dirty, and that was something neither of them knew how to do. I sat back up and looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. My eyes looked wild, hurt, and sharp. Too sharp. If I walked in there looking like this, they would know. They would see the intelligence, the rage. I had to hide it. Brandon said I was out of it. He said I didn't know what day it was. Fine. If they wanted a confused old man, I would give them a performance worthy of an Academy Award. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of stale tobacco and wet dog. I let my shoulders slump forward, collapsing my posture until I looked 3 inches shorter. I relaxed my face, letting my jaw hang slightly loose. I practiced a vacant stare, focusing my eyes on nothing in particular. I opened the truck door and stepped out into the rain again. This time, I didn't walk with the purposeful stride of a man with millions in the bank. I shuffled. I dragged my left foot, slightly exaggerating the limp from my hip. I reached the porch again. Inside, the laughter had died down, replaced by the sound of the TV. They were relaxing, comfortable in their victory. I didn't use my key. A man who lives here uses a key. A guest or a confused old man knocks. I raised my fist and knocked weakly on the door, 3 uneven taps. The footsteps inside were heavy and impatient. The lock turned and the door swung open. Brandon stood there, a glass of wine in his hand, his face flushing slightly when he saw me. For a split second, I saw the guilt in his eyes, but he blinked, and it was gone, replaced by a mask of exaggerated concern. "Dad," he said loud and slow, like he was talking to a child. "You are finally back. We were getting so worried. You have been gone for hours." I looked at him, blinking slowly, letting rainwater drip from my nose. I stared at his forehead, avoiding his eyes so he wouldn't see the fire burning in mine. Is it Tuesday?" I asked, my voice rasping and cracking perfectly. I think I forgot to buy milk, Brandon." Brandon looked back over his shoulder at Tiffany, who was lounging on the sofa. She didn't even look up from her phone, but I saw her smirk. "Come inside, Dad," Brandon said, grabbing my arm with a grip that was a little too tight. "It is Thursday. And don't worry about the milk. We have everything taken care of. Everything is going to be just fine." I let him pull me into the warmth of the house that was built on my sweat and money. As I crossed the threshold, I stumbled slightly, and Brandon caught me sighing loudly. "Careful there, old-timer," he muttered under his breath. I allowed myself to be led to the worn-out armchair in the corner, the one they told me was my special spot, but which I knew was just the furthest point from the television. I sat down and let my wet jacket soak into the fabric. I looked around the room, seeing it with new eyes. I saw the expensive electronics. I saw the designer throw pillows. And I saw the predators watching their prey. "I am tired, Brandon," I said softly, closing my eyes halfway. "So very tired." "Sleep then, Dad." Tiffany called out from the couch, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "You have a big day tomorrow. We are going to take a little trip." I nodded slowly, letting my chin drop to my chest. "Yes, a trip. I am ready." But inside, my mind was racing, calculating, planning. They thought the game was over. They thought they had checkmated the king. But they forgot one thing. They were playing against a man who built foundations for a living. And I was about to bring the whole house down on top of them. The dining room table was set like a stage for a play I never wanted to audition for. The good china, the plates with the gold rim that my late wife had collected. Piece by piece over 30 years was laid out on the lace tablecloth. Usually we ate takeout out of styrofoam containers in front of the television, or Brandon and Tiffany would eat in the kitchen, while I took a tray to my small back room. But tonight, the crystal wine glasses were sparkling under the chandelier, and the smell of roast beef and rosemary filled the air. It was a smell that should have made me hungry, but instead it made my stomach turn. I knew exactly what this was. It was the last meal of a condemned man. "Here you go, Dad. Let me get you the best piece." Tiffany said, her voice dripping with a syrup so sweet it was almost sickening. She placed a thick slice of beef on my plate next to a mound of mashed potatoes that looked too perfect to be homemade. I looked at her. Her eyes were bright, too bright. She was wearing a new dress, something silky and expensive, that probably cost more than my monthly Social Security check. She smiled at me, and for a second, I saw the shark beneath the surface waiting for the blood in the water. "Thank you, Tiffany," I said, my voice trembling just enough to sell the act. "You are too kind to an old man." Brandon uncorked a bottle of red wine and poured a generous amount into my glass. "Drink up, Dad. It is a celebration. We want you to relax tonight." I watched the dark red liquid swirl in the glass. It looked like blood. I took a small sip. It was expensive vintage. They were really investing in this performance. I wondered if they put it on the credit card they planned to pay off with the money from selling my house. "So, Dad," Brandon started cutting his meat with precise, aggressive strokes. "We have been thinking a lot about you lately, about your health, about your back." I kept my head down, chewing slowly. The meat tasted like ash in my mouth. My back is fine, son. Just the rain makes it ache a bit." "No, Dad. It is more than that." Tiffany chimed in, leaning forward, her elbows on the table. "We see how much you struggle. The stairs, the loneliness when we are at work. We worry about you all the time. It breaks our hearts to see you sitting in that room all day. It breaks their hearts." I almost laughed out loud. The only time they looked in my room was to tell me to turn down the volume on my radio. I swallowed the food, forcing it down past the lump in my throat. "I don't want to be a burden," I muttered, staring at the pattern on the tablecloth. "You are not a burden, Dad," Brandon said quickly, too quickly. "You are family. And that is why we found a solution. A place where you can be treated like the king you are." He reached under the table and pulled out a brochure. He slid it across the tablecloth toward me like he was dealing a winning hand of poker. "Sunny Meadows," he announced proudly. I reached out with my shaking hand and took the brochure. It was glossy, colorful, and completely fake. I could tell just by the weight of the paper that it was printed on a home office inkjet, not a professional press. I put on my reading glasses deliberately, taking my time cleaning the lenses with my napkin while they watched with bated breath. I looked at the cover. It showed a smiling elderly couple walking hand in hand across a lush green golf course. In the background, there was a sparkling blue swimming pool and a building that looked like a five-star hotel. I looked closer. The shadows on the golf course were going in two different directions. The building in the background was clearly a stock photo of a resort in Florida, not a nursing home in Illinois. And the grass. Nobody in Chicago has grass that green in October. "Wow," I said, widening my eyes in feigned amazement. "This looks expensive, Brandon. I can't afford this." "Don't you worry about the money, Dad," Tiffany said, reaching out and patting my hand. Her skin was cold. "We handled everything. The insurance covers most of it, and we will chip in the rest. You deserve the best. Look at the amenities. Heated pool, gourmet dining, daily excursions. Dangerous." There it was. They were already framing the narrative. I was frail. I was a liability. I was a child who couldn't be trusted with a chisel. I looked down at the brochure again. The lie was so thin I could see right through it to the brick walls and chain-link fences of the real Sunny Meadows. They weren't sending me to a resort. They were sending me to a warehouse for the dying so they could cash out my life. "Okay," I said softly, dropping the brochure. "It sounds nice." Brandon let out a breath he had been holding. "It is more than nice, Dad. It is perfect. And the best part is they have a room available immediately. But we have to secure it tonight. It is very exclusive, you know. There is a waiting list a mile long." He reached under the table again, and this time he pulled out a thick document. He placed a heavy fountain pen on top of it. Just a few standard forms. He said, his voice casual, too casual. Registration, dietary restrictions, that sort of thing. Just sign at the bottom of the sticky notes, and we can get you packed in the morning. I looked at the stack of papers. It was thick, way too thick for a registration form. I leaned in, squinting. I saw the words at the top of the first visible page, durable power of attorney. And underneath that, obscured slightly by the way he had folded the page, transfer of deed. They weren't just locking me up. They were stripping me clean. Tonight. Right here at the dinner table over roast beef and wine. My heart hammered against my ribs. If I signed this, I was dead. Legally, I would cease to exist as a free man. They could sell my house, empty my bank accounts, and leave me to rot without me having a say in the world. I can't see very well without better light, I muttered, leaning back. Maybe I should take it to my room and read it in the morning. No! Brandon snapped. His voice was sharp, cracking like a whip. He caught himself instantly and forced a smile back onto his face, but the eyes were cold, dead stones. I mean, the office closes first thing in the morning, Dad. We need to fax this tonight or you lose the spot. You don't want to lose the spot, do you? After all we did to get it for you. The guilt trip, the pressure. He pushed the paper closer to me until it was touching my plate. Just sign it, Dad. Trust me. I am your son. I know what is best for you. I looked at him. The man I taught to ride a bike. The man I held when he cried over his first breakup. The man I was ready to give $18 million to just yesterday. And I realized he was gone. This man sitting across from me was a stranger. A greedy, desperate stranger. I picked up the pen. My hand was shaking. This time I didn't have to pretend. The rage and the sorrow were making my whole body vibrate. I moved the pen toward the paper. Brandon leaned in, his eyes hungry, fixated on the tip of the pen. Tiffany stopped chewing her fork, hovering in midair. I brought the pen down, but not to the paper. I let my elbow spasm. It was a calculated jerk, a move I had practiced in my mind 1,000 times in the last 10 seconds. My arm shot out and hit the edge of the soup bowl. The heavy porcelain bowl filled with scalding hot potato soup tipped over. It didn't just spill, it launched. A wave of thick, creamy hot liquid flew across the table and landed square in Brandon's lap. He screamed. It was a sound of pure shock and pain. He jumped up, knocking his chair backward. "You stupid old!" He roared, his face turning purple. He grabbed a napkin and frantically wiped at his crotch. His expensive slacks ruined the soup, soaking into the fabric, burning his skin. Tiffany shrieked, dropping her fork. "Oh my God. Brandon, are you okay? Look at the carpet. The rug is ruined." I sat there frozen, the pen still in my hand. The papers now splattered with drops of soup. "I am sorry," I stammered, dropping the pen. "I am so sorry." My hand. It just jerked. I don't know what happened. I am so clumsy. Brandon looked at me. For a second, the mask didn't just slip, it shattered. I saw pure, unadulterated hatred. He looked like he wanted to reach across the table and strangle me. His hands were clenched into fists, his chest heaving. "You did that on purpose," he hissed. "Brandon." Tiffany put a hand on his arm, her eyes warning him. "He is confused. Look at him. He is shaking." Brandon took a deep breath, closing his eyes. He realized he was losing the plot. If he attacked me now, he couldn't get the signature. He needed me compliant. He needed me trusting. He exhaled slowly, and when he opened his eyes, the hatred was hidden again, buried under layers of forced patience. "It is okay, Dad," he said through gritted teeth. "Accidents happen. It is just soup. It is just very hot soup." I stood up, clutching the table for support. I ruined the dinner. I ruined everything. I should just go to bed. I am no good for anything anymore. No dad. Wait, the papers. Brandon started reaching for the soggy document. I can't sign now. I wailed, playing the part of the distressed, senile old man to perfection. I am too upset. Look at my hands. I can't even hold the pen. I need to lie down. Please let me lie down. I shuffled away from the table, moving as fast as my fake limp would allow. We can do it in the morning, right, Brandon? Tiffany whispered loudly. Let him sleep. We will get him at breakfast. Fine. Brandon snapped, grabbing the wet papers. Go to bed, Dad. Just go to bed. I retreated to my room, the small back bedroom that used to be a pantry. I closed the door and locked it. It was a flimsy lock, one that could be picked with a hairpin, but it made me feel slightly safer. I sat on the edge of the narrow twin bed, my heart racing like a jackhammer. I had bought myself time, but not much. I could hear them in the laundry room down the hall. I heard the aggressive sound of the washing machine lid being slammed shut. I can't believe him. Brandon was shouting, his voice muffled by the walls. He is losing his mind, Tiff. He is dangerous. Did you see that? He practically threw it at me. We have to move fast. Tiffany replied, her voice cold and sharp. Tomorrow morning, we don't ask, we tell. If he won't sign, we get the doctor to declare him incompetent immediately. I already have the number for the emergency psych evaluation. We are getting that house, Brandon. One way or another, he is gone tomorrow. I sat in the dark, staring at the line of light under my door. The soup stain on the papers had bought me 12, maybe 14 hours. I reached under the mattress and felt the hard, reassuring shape of the $18 million file I had moved from the truck when they were in the shower. I had the money. I had the power. But I was trapped in a house with two people who were ready to erase me from existence. I looked at the old alarm clock on the nightstand. It was 8 p.m. By 8 a.m. tomorrow, the war would begin. I laid back on the pillow, but I didn't close my eyes. I listened to the house settle. I listened to my son cursing my name in the other room, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel love for him. I felt clarity. Tomorrow, I wouldn't be the father anymore. Tomorrow, I would be the judge, the jury, and the executioner, and the sentence was going to be severe. I told the lie with the practiced ease of a man who had been undercover in his own life for 24 hours. I shuffled into the kitchen where Brandon was aggressively typing on his laptop, and Tiffany was blending a green smoothie that looked like swamp sludge. I told them I was going to play chess with Old Man Miller at the park. It was a flimsy excuse considering Miller had been dead for 3 years, but neither of my loving family members noticed or cared. They just waved me away, eager to have the house to themselves, to finalize the sale of my dignity. I climbed into my truck, and the moment the door shut, the act dropped. My spine straightened. My eyes cleared. I wasn't the confused geriatric they thought I was. I was a man on a reconnaissance mission. I punched the address of Sunny Meadows into the GPS on my phone. The brochure Brandon had shown me the night before depicted a lush paradise somewhere near the lakeshore, but the blue line on my map didn't lead to the lake. It led south. Deep south. Into the industrial wasteland where the city dumps its garbage and its forgotten memories. The drive took 40 minutes. The scenery changed from manicured lawns to cracked pavement and abandoned warehouses. The sky seemed to get grayer the further I drove, as if the pollution was hanging lower here. I found it tucked behind a rusting scrap metal yard. The sign said Sunny Meadows Care Facility, but the sun had bleached the letters until they were barely readable, and the meadows were nothing but a parking lot filled with potholes and weeds pushing through the asphalt. I parked my truck a block away behind a dumpster that smelled of rotting cabbage. I grabbed my phone and pulled my cap low over my eyes. I walked with my real stride, purposeful and steady, ignoring the ache in my hip. I wasn't a visitor today. I was an inspector looking for cracks in the foundation. The building was a two-story brick monstrosity that looked like it had been a factory in a previous life. The windows were small and barred. There were no balconies, no golf course, no sparkling pool, just a grim red box designed to keep people in until they stopped breathing. I walked up to the perimeter fence. It was chain link topped with barbed wire that leaned aggressively inward. I took out my phone and snapped the first picture. This was the resort my son was selling me. This was the paradise Tiffany claimed cost a fortune. I found a service gate that was left slightly ajar, a clear violation of security protocol. I slipped inside, moving between the shadows of the delivery trucks. The smell hit me instantly. It wasn't the smell of pine trees or fresh linen. It was the heavy, suffocating stench of industrial bleach trying and failing to cover up the smell of urine and stale cafeteria food. It was the smell of a place where hope goes to die. I crept along the side of the building, looking for a window to peer into. I found one near the back at ground level. The glass was grimy, smeared with years of rain and dirt. I used my sleeve to wipe a small circle clean and looked inside. What I saw made my blood run cold. It wasn't a dining hall. It was a holding pen. Dozens of elderly people were sitting in wheelchairs lined up against the wall, like discarded furniture. A television was blaring a cartoon at high volume, but nobody was watching. Most of them were slumped over asleep or medicated into oblivion. There were no nurses chatting with them. No activities. Just a single orderly sitting at a desk, scrolling through her phone while a woman in the corner cried softly for her mother. I snapped a photo, then another. I needed proof. I needed to show the judge exactly what my son considered adequate care. I moved further along the wall towards a small concrete patio area that the brochure had probably labeled as the garden. "Hey, you." The voice boomed like a thunderclap. I spun around. Standing at the doorway to the building was a guard. He was huge, a wall of muscle and fat squeezed into a uniform that was too tight. He had a shaved head and a face that looked like it had been chiseled out of granite by an unskilled sculptor. "No visitors allowed back here," he shouted, stepping onto the patio. He slapped a baton against his palm. "And absolutely no cameras. Give me that phone." I stood up. My knees popped, but I locked them straight. I was 74, but I was 6'2", and I had swung sledgehammers for a living before this guard was even born. I assessed him quickly. He was heavy, slow-moving. He relied on intimidation. "I am just looking for the admissions office," I lied, putting on my confused voice but keeping my body tense, ready to move. "I think I got lost." "You are not lost," the guard growled, closing the distance between us. "You are taking pictures. I saw the flash. Hand over the phone, old man, or I will break it, and then I will break you." He lunged for me. A younger man might have run. A weaker man might have cowered. But I was a contractor. I knew how structures worked, and I knew how to use the environment. I stepped back quickly, putting the wheelchair between us. The guard stumbled, trying to avoid hitting the patient. "Watch out!" I shouted, pointing frantically at the wall behind him. "The gas line. It is sparking." It was the oldest trick in the book, a distraction based on immediate danger. For a split second, the guard looked back instinctively, protecting himself from an explosion that wasn't happening. That second was all I needed. I didn't run. I moved with calculated precision. I shoved the stack of wooden pallets I had been hiding behind. They were heavy, but adrenaline is a powerful drug. The pallets toppled over with a deafening crash, blocking the doorway and creating a wooden barricade between the guard and the exit to the parking lot. "What the hell?" the guard roared, turning back, but I was already moving. I scrambled over the low perimeter fence using a rusting dumpster as a step. I felt a sharp tear in my jacket and a scratch on my arm from the barbed wire, but I didn't stop. I landed on the asphalt on the other side, my ankles protesting the impact. "Hey, come back here." I heard the guard shouting, but he was trapped behind the pallets and the fence. I didn't look back. I moved as fast as my legs would carry me, shuffling into a run that was more of a fast limp. I made it to my truck, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I fumbled with the keys, dropping them once before jamming them into the ignition. The engine roared to life, a beautiful sound of freedom. I peeled out of that parking lot, leaving a cloud of dust behind me. I didn't slow down until I was 3 miles away, back on the main road, surrounded by normal traffic. I pulled into a gas station parking lot and killed the engine. I sat there for a moment, breathing hard, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles were white. I looked at the phone on the seat beside me. I scrolled through the photos. The bleak brick walls, the sleeping drugged patients, the old man with the cracked lips. This wasn't just a bad nursing home. It was a crime scene. And my son, my own flesh and blood, had signed a paper to send me there. He knew. He had to know. The price alone would have told him. You don't get a bed for that cheap unless they are cutting corners on human dignity. He didn't care if I lived or died. He just wanted me gone. A tear leaked out of my eye, hot and angry. I wiped it away furiously. Sadness was a luxury I could no longer afford. Sadness was for victims, and I was done being a victim. I picked up the phone. My fingers were steady now. I dialed the number for Mr. Caldwell, the lawyer. He answered on the second ring. Harrison, is everything all right? You are supposed to be laying low. The plan has changed, Mr. Caldwell, I said. My voice sounded different to my own ears. It was deeper, rougher. It was the voice of the man who used to fire incompetent subcontractors without blinking. What do you mean, changed? Caldwell asked, concern in his voice. I just visited Sunny Meadows, I said. I have pictures, Caldwell. I have evidence. But that is not enough. I don't just want to survive this. I want to end it. Harrison, what are you asking me to do? I looked at the photo of the old man one last time. I want you to contact the bank that holds Brandon's mortgage, I said. And I want you to find out who holds his gambling debts. You said I have $18 million liquid cash coming on Friday, right? Yes, but use the emergency bridge loan from the trust I commanded. Buy it all, Caldwell. Buy the mortgage. Buy the credit card debt. Buy the personal loans. I want to own every single cent that boy owes to anyone in this world. There was a silence on the other end of the line. A long, heavy silence. Harrison Caldwell said slowly, If you do that, you become his creditor. You hold the power to foreclose, to seize assets, to destroy his credit rating forever. I know, I said, staring at the scars on my hands. He was ready to sell me into hell for $400,000, Caldwell. I am just returning the favor. Buy the debt, and have the papers ready for the big reveal tomorrow. I hung up the phone. I started the truck. I wasn't going home to hide anymore. I was going home to wait. The trap was set, the bait was taken, and the hunter was coming home for dinner. I drove around the block 3 times before I saw their cars leave. Brandon's leased BMW sped off first, probably heading to meet his loan shark, or perhaps to try and secure a bridge loan before he stole my money. Tiffany's white Range Rover followed a few minutes later, heading in the direction of the mall. They left the house unguarded, thinking I was miles away, playing chess with a ghost in a park. I pulled my truck into the driveway, but I didn't park in my usual spot. I pulled it around the back near the garage where the overgrown hedges would hide it from the street. I killed the engine and sat there for a moment, listening to the silence. My heart was still hammering from the confrontation at the nursing home, but now my mind was icy clear. I let myself in through the back door. The house was quiet, but it felt different now. It didn't feel like a home. It felt like a crime scene that hadn't been processed yet. I walked straight to the hallway that led to Brandon's home office. The door was locked. Of course it was locked. Brandon always kept it locked, claiming he had sensitive client files in there. I used to respect that. I used to think he was a professional protecting his business. Now I knew he was just a criminal hiding the evidence. I knelt down in front of the doorknob. My knees protested, sending a sharp jolt of pain up my thighs, but I ignored it. I looked at the lock. It was a standard interior privacy lock, the kind you buy at a hardware store for $10. It was an insult to a man who had installed bank vaults in the 80s. I pulled a small flathead screwdriver from my pocket, the one I always kept for tightening cabinet hinges. Then I reached into my wallet and pulled out a heavy-duty paperclip I had snagged from the lawyer's office. I straightened the paperclip with my teeth, bending the tip into a small hook. My hands were gnarled from arthritis and scarred from 50 years of labor, but when I held a tool, the tremors stopped. It was muscle memory. It was the one language my body still spoke fluently. I inserted the screwdriver into the bottom of the keyway, applying just a whisper of tension. Then I slid the paperclip in. I closed my eyes, visualizing the pins inside the brass cylinder. Pin 1. Click. Loose. Pin 2. Binding. I applied a little more pressure, feeling the tiny metal cylinder resist. I nudged it. Click. It took me less than 30 seconds. A soft metallic thud echoed in the hallway, and the knob turned in my hand. I opened the door and slipped inside, closing it softly behind me. The room smelled of stale coffee and desperation. It was a mess. Papers were strewn everywhere, covering the mahogany desk and the floor. This wasn't the office of a successful real estate agent. This was the cockpit of a plane that was going down in flames. I walked over to the desk. The laptop was open, the screen dark. I tapped the spacebar. No password. Brandon was arrogant. He thought the lock on the door was enough. The screen flared to life, and I was staring at his email inbox. It was a sea of red flags. Subject lines screamed in all caps. Final notice. Urgent. Foreclosure warning. I started opening them one by one, my eyes scanning the numbers. The mortgage on the house, this house that I had helped them buy, was 6 months behind. The bank had already started pre-foreclosure proceedings. They were weeks away from putting a sign on the lawn. I opened a spreadsheet titled Debt Consolidation. I scrolled down and the numbers made me dizzy. Credit cards maxed out to the limit of $50,000. Personal loans from predatory online lenders with interest rates that should be illegal. But then I saw a folder on the desktop simply labeled Viper. I clicked it. Inside were scanned images of promissory notes. But these weren't from a bank. They were handwritten on lined paper signed with a thumbprint. $200,000. My son owed $200,000 to a man named Viper. I knew that name. Everyone in Chicago construction knew Viper. He was a loan shark who operated out of the back of a pool hall on the south side. He didn't send letters when you missed a payment. He sent guys with baseball bats. I felt a wave of nausea. Brandon wasn't just broke. He was in mortal danger. That explained the desperation. That explained why he was willing to sell his own father down the river. He was trying to buy his life with mine. I turned away from the screen, needing to find something physical, something concrete. I pulled open the top drawer of the desk. It was stuffed with unopened envelopes. I grabbed a handful. Underneath the stack of bills, I found a thick manila envelope. It looked official. I opened it and pulled out the papers inside. My breath caught in my throat. It was a loan application for a short-term, high-interest cash advance. $50,000. Date of application was 3 weeks ago. I looked at the bottom of the page. There was a signature. Harrison Thorne. I stared at it. It was my name. It was my handwriting. Or at least a very good imitation of it. The loop on the H was slightly too wide, and the T was crossed a little too high, but to an untrained eye, it was perfect. He had forged my signature. He had taken out a loan in my name using my social security number. and the deed to my old house as collateral. I flipped the page. There was another document, a transfer of title. He had tried to sign my house over to himself months ago, but the notary had rejected it due to a mismatch in the dates. That was why he needed the power of attorney. He needed to legitimize the theft he had already started. I dropped the paper like it was burning my skin. This wasn't just bad financial management. This was a felony. My son was a felon. I stood there in the center of the room, surrounded by the evidence of his betrayal. The silence of the house pressed in on me. I felt exposed. I felt foolish for ever thinking I could save him. You can't save someone who is actively trying to drown you to keep themselves afloat. Suddenly, the sound of gravel crunching under tires shattered the silence. I froze. I heard a car door slam, then another. I rushed to the window and peeked through the blinds. The white Range Rover was back. Tiffany. But she wasn't alone. Panic surged through me. I couldn't be found here. If they found me in the office with the evidence, they would know the jig was up. They might get desperate. A man who owes $200,000 to a shark is capable of anything. I looked at the door. I couldn't make it to the back exit in time. I heard the front door open, the beep of the alarm being deactivated. I scanned the room. There was nowhere to hide. The desk was open underneath. The curtains were too sheer. My eyes landed on the closet door in the corner. It was a small walk-in closet where Tiffany kept her off-season coats and overflow wardrobe. I scrambled toward it, moving as fast as my stiff hips would allow. I yanked the door open and squeezed inside, pulling it shut, just as I heard footsteps clicking on the hardwood floor of the hallway. The closet was tiny. It was packed tight with fur coats and winter jackets wrapped in plastic. I pressed myself into the back corner, crouching down behind a wall of long wool coats. My knees screamed in protest. I bit my lip to keep from groaning. I held my breath, my heart beating so loud I was sure they could hear it through the wood. The office door opened. I saw a sliver of light cut across the floor through the slats of the closet door. Tiffany walked in. I could see her expensive heels clicking on the floor. She walked straight to the desk. "I told you it was unlocked," she said. Her voice was agitated. "Brandon is so careless. He leaves everything out." Then I heard a second set of footsteps. Heavier, slower. The boots were black leather, thick-soled. Not Brandon's shoes. A man's voice spoke. It was deep, gravelly, and unfamiliar. "You sure the old man isn't here?" "He is at the park," Tiffany snapped. "He won't be back for an hour. He moves like a snail. We have time." I huddled deeper into the coats, sweat trickling down my back. Who was this man? Was it the loan shark? Was it a hitman? The man walked around the desk. I could hear him shuffling the papers, the same papers I had just been holding. "This looks like a mess, Tiffany," he grunted. "Brandon is underwater." "Deep. Viper is getting impatient. He told me to tell you that if he doesn't get the cash by Friday noon, he is going to start taking payments in bone." I know, Tiffany's voice trembled, but not with fear, with anger. "That is why we are expediting the process. The old man signs tomorrow. We liquidate his assets immediately. The house sale is already lined up with a cash buyer. We will have the money." "You better," the man said. "And what about the husband?" "Brandon. Does he know about us?" I froze. The air in the closet seemed to vanish. Tiffany laughed. A cruel, cold sound. "Brandon doesn't know anything. He is so busy trying to keep his head above water he doesn't notice that I am the one holding the anchor. Once we get the old man's money and pay off Viper, I am filing for divorce. I am taking half of what is left, and we are going to Cabo just like we planned." My jaw dropped. The betrayal had layers. It was a rotten onion of deceit. Tiffany wasn't just conspiring with Brandon against me. She was conspiring with this stranger against Brandon. She was playing everyone. "Come here," the man said. I heard the sound of movement, the rustle of fabric. Then the sickening sound of kissing right there in the office of the man she was married to, while his father hid in the closet 3 feet away. "We need to be quick," Tiffany whispered. "Grab the deed from the drawer. We need to make a copy for the realtor." I watched through the slat as the man reached for the drawer I had just closed, the drawer where I had left the papers slightly disheveled. He pulled the drawer open. He paused. "Hey," he said, his voice sharp. "What?" Tiffany asked. "Did you go through this drawer this morning?" "No, why?" "The files are moved. And look at this." I pressed my hand over my mouth. I had left the forged loan application on top. I hadn't put it back at the bottom of the stack. "Someone has been looking at this," the man said. The room went deadly silent. I stopped breathing. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying to a God I hadn't spoken to in years. "Check the house," the man commanded. "Check every room, now." I heard them both turn, and then I saw the man's boots stop. He turned back slowly. He was facing the closet. He took a step toward me. I gripped the screwdriver in my pocket. My hand wasn't shaking anymore. If he opened that door, I wasn't going down without a fight. I was trapped. I was outnumbered. But I was cornered. And a cornered animal is the most dangerous thing on earth. The brass handle of the closet door turned slowly, and I gripped the handle of the screwdriver so hard, my palm began to sweat. I was 74 years old, but in that moment I felt the primal surge of adrenaline that belongs to a man fighting for his life. I was ready to lunge. I was ready to drive the steel tip of that tool into the leg of the stranger standing just inches away. I held my breath, my lungs burning, as the door clicked, unlatched. But then Tiffany spoke. Her voice was husky and impatient. "Leave it, Mike. We don't have time for a scavenger hunt. If the old man was here, we would smell his Bengay cream. He is probably asleep on a park bench somewhere. Come here." The handle stopped turning. The latch clicked back into place. I heard the heavy boots step away from the door, and I let out a breath so quiet it didn't even disturb the dust motes dancing in the darkness. I heard the sound of papers being thrown back onto the desk, followed by the rustle of clothing. I peered through the slats again. Tiffany had pushed the stranger back against Brandon's mahogany desk. She was kissing him. Not the peck on the cheek she gave my son, but a hungry, devouring kiss that made my stomach turn. I recognized the man now. He wasn't the loan shark. He was Mike, the personal trainer she had hired 6 months ago, the one she said was helping her with her core strength. I watched as his hand slid down her back, and she laughed a low, throaty sound that I had never heard her make in 10 years of marriage to my son. "So what is the timeline?" Mike asked, pulling away slightly to look at her. "Viper is getting antsy. He wants his money by Friday, or he says he is going to break Brandon's legs." "Let him break them," Tiffany whispered, running her fingers through Mike's hair. "It might make the divorce proceedings easier if Brandon is in a cast." I pressed my ear against the wood. "Divorce?" "Yeah, but the money," Mike pressed. "The money is good as ours," Tiffany said. "Tomorrow morning the old man signs the power of attorney. By noon he is in Sunny Meadows. By 1 o'clock I liquidate the house. We pay Viper off to keep him quiet, and then we take the rest." "And the old man?" Mike asked. "What if he talks? What if he complains to a doctor that he was forced?" Tiffany smiled, and it was the most terrifying thing I had ever seen. In the dim light of the office, she looked like a demon. "He won't talk for long," she said casually, like she was discussing the weather. "He has a heart condition, Mike. Arrhythmia. He takes beta blockers 3 times a day. If he were to, say, miss a few doses, or maybe if his dosage got mixed up in that chaotic nursing home, well, at his age, a heart attack is just nature taking its course." My blood ran cold. I felt the sensation of ice water pouring down my spine. This wasn't just theft. This wasn't just abandonment. This was a conspiracy to commit murder. She wasn't just planning to lock me away. She was planning to kill me. She was going to cut off my medication and let my heart fail so she could run off with this muscle-bound thug. And Brandon, my stupid, arrogant son, he was just a pawn. He thought he was saving himself, but he was digging his own grave right alongside mine. Once I was dead, and the money was secured, she would divorce him, leaving him with the guilt and the grief, while she vanished with half the assets. Mike laughed a cruel sound. "You are cold, Tiff. I love it." "I just know what I want," Tiffany replied, kissing him again. "And I don't want to be stuck in this suburbs nursing a broke husband and a senile father-in-law. I want Cabo. I want the beach. And I want you." They stayed in the office for another 10 minutes. 10 minutes that felt like 10 years. I had to listen to them plan their future on the grave of my past. I had to listen to the woman my son adored mock him, call him weak, call him a loser. Finally, they pulled apart. "We should go," Mike said. "If Brandon comes back early from his meeting and finds me here, it might complicate things." "Let him come," Tiffany scoffed. "He is so beaten down he probably wouldn't even fight you." "But you are right. We need to look innocent. Go out the back way. I will meet you at the hotel later." I heard the heavy boots walk to the door, then the lighter click of Tiffany's heels. The office door opened and closed. I waited. I counted to 500 in my head. My legs were cramping so badly I thought I might never walk again. My hip was screaming in agony, but physical pain was nothing compared to the horror of what I had just heard. I pushed the closet door open. I fell out onto the floor, gasping for air. The room smelled of her perfume and his cologne, a toxic mix that filled my lungs. I pulled myself up using the edge of the desk. My hands were shaking uncontrollably. I looked at the papers on the desk. They were messy. I took a deep breath. I couldn't leave a trace. I had to be the ghost they thought I was. I spent 5 minutes arranging the papers exactly as I had found them. I put the forged loan application back in the middle of the stack. I wiped the handle of the drawer with my sleeve to remove my prints. I wiped the closet doorknob. I checked the window. Tiffany's car was gone. I slipped out of the office and locked the door behind me using the paperclip and screwdriver method in reverse. It clicked shut, sealing the secrets inside. I walked to the back door. I didn't limp. I didn't shuffle. I marched. I got into my truck and started the engine. I drove away from that house, and I knew I would never step foot in it as a father again. The man who lived there, the Harrison Thorne who fixed leaky faucets and apologized for taking up space, was dead. Tiffany had killed him in that office. I drove straight to the city. I didn't look at the speed limit. I had a meeting to make. Mr. Caldwell's secretary tried to tell me he was in a meeting when I stormed into the law firm, but the look on my face stopped her mid-sentence. I looked like a man who had just walked out of a burning building. I pushed past her and opened the door to Caldwell's office. He was on the phone, but he hung up immediately when he saw me. "Harrison," he said, standing up. "You look—" "I know how I look," I interrupted, my voice rasping like a saw blade cutting through oak. "I look like a man who just found out his daughter-in-law is planning to murder him." Caldwell's face went pale. "Sit down, Harrison. Tell me everything." I didn't sit. I paced. I told him everything. I told him about the closet. I told him about Mike. I told him about the heart medication and the plan to divorce Brandon. When I finished, Caldwell sat back in his chair, stunned. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "We need to go to the police," he said quietly. "This is conspiracy to commit murder, Harrison. We have enough to—" "No." I slammed my hand on the desk. "No police. Not yet." "Why, Harrison? This woman is dangerous. Because if we go to the police now, it is my word against hers, I hissed. She will say I am senile. She will say I imagined it. She will say I am a confused old man who forgot his meds and is hallucinating. And Brandon will side with her. He is so blinded by her he will testify against me. Then what do you want to do? Caldwell asked. I want proof, I said. Irrefutable, undeniable proof. I pulled a crumpled piece of paper from my pocket. It was a list I had made in the truck. I want you to hire a private security team, I said. I want hidden cameras installed in that house, living room, kitchen, and especially the dining room. I want them installed today while they are out. Can you do that? Caldwell nodded slowly. I have a firm I use for corporate espionage cases. They are expensive, but they are fast. Do it, I said. And one more thing. What is it? I want to buy the debt, I said. All of it. Brandon's mortgage, the credit cards, and the note from Viper. Harrison Caldwell warned. Buying debt from a loan shark is not like buying a mortgage. These are dangerous people. I don't care, I said. I want to own him, Caldwell. I want to own my son. Because right now he is a slave to his wife and his debts. If I am going to save him from her, I need to be the one holding the leash. I leaned over the desk, looking the lawyer dead in the eye. Use the trust fund. Pay Viper whatever he wants plus 10% for a quick transfer. Get the paper. I want to be the one Brandon has to answer to when the clock strikes 12. Caldwell looked at me for a long moment. He saw the resolve in my eyes. He saw the contractor who used to build skyscrapers. Okay, he said, picking up the phone. I will make the calls. I turned to the window, looking out at the Chicago skyline. The rain had stopped, but the clouds were still dark and heavy. Go ahead and plot Tiffany, I whispered to the glass. Plan your vacation in Cabo. Pick out your bikini. Because you are not going to the beach. You are going to prison. And I am going to be the one who locks the door. The security technician Mr. Caldwell hired was a man named Silas, who moved with the silent efficiency of a cat. He didn't ask questions. He didn't look at family photos. He just drilled tiny holes into the molding of the ceiling and swapped out the smoke detectors for units that looked identical but saw everything. I stood in the center of the living room, leaning on my cane, watching him work. It felt strange violating the privacy of my own home. This was the house where I had bounced my grandson on my knee before Brandon and Tiffany decided kids were too expensive and sent him to boarding school. This was the house where I had cooked Thanksgiving dinners before I was relegated to the small back room. Now I was wiring it like a federal penitentiary. Put one in the kitchen, I instructed, pointing to the cabinet above the coffee maker. That is where they talk when they think I am asleep. And put one facing the dining table. I want to see their faces when the lawyer walks in tomorrow. Silas nodded, finishing the installation in less than an hour. By the time Brandon's BMW pulled into the driveway, the technician was gone out the back door, leaving no trace of his presence except for the invisible eyes watching from the corners of the room. I sat down in my armchair, the worn leather groaning under my weight. I took a deep breath. The stage was set. The audience was arriving. It was time for the performance of a lifetime. When the front door opened, I didn't look up. I stared blankly at the unlit fireplace, my mouth hanging slightly open. Dad. We are home, Brandon called out, throwing his keys on the table. His voice was tight, stressed. I waited a beat. Then two. I turned my head slowly, my movements jerky and uncoordinated. Leonard, I rasped, blinking rapidly. Is that you, Leonard? Did you bring the truck around? Brandon stopped in his tracks. He looked at Tiffany, who was shaking her umbrella in the foyer. He called me Leonard, Brandon whispered. He thinks I am his dead brother. Tiffany walked into the room, her eyes scanning me with a mixture of disgust and delight. She didn't see a father losing his mind. She saw a hurdle lowering itself so she could jump over it easier. Play along, she mouthed to Brandon. Brandon walked over to me. He squatted down, but he didn't touch me. He looked at me like I was a specimen in a jar. "It is me, Dad. It is Brandon. Leonard is gone, remember?" "Gone," I repeated, letting a tear leak out of my eye. "No. We have to finish the framing on the Johnson house. The concrete is coming at noon." I tried to stand up, but I let my legs buckle. I grabbed the side table for support, and my hand swept a porcelain figurine, a heavy statue of a dancer that Tiffany loved, onto the floor. It shattered with a loud crash. I gasped, recoiling in fear. I covered my head with my arms, cowering like a beaten dog. "Don't hit me," I whimpered. "I am sorry, Leonard. I didn't mean to break it. Don't hit me with the belt." The room went silent. I was improvising, but I was drawing from a deep well of pain. Leonard never hit me. But the fear of being punished for being old, for being in the way, that was real. Brandon stared at the shattered pieces of the statue. Usually, he would have yelled. He would have lectured me about being clumsy, about the cost of things. But today he just smiled. A slow, creeping smile that didn't reach his eyes. "It is okay, Dad," he said, standing up and dusting off his hands. "Nobody's going to hit you. You are just confused. You are very, very confused." He looked at Tiffany and nodded. It was a signal. The signal that said I was broken enough to be discarded. Tiffany walked over, stepping over the broken porcelain without a second thought. She put a hand on my shoulder. Her touch was light, but it felt heavy with intent. "You know, Harrison, you really are getting worse," she said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "It is not safe for you here anymore. You need professional help. You need to be somewhere where they can watch you 24 hours a day." I looked up at her, widening my eyes. "I want to go home," I whispered. "I want to go to the farm." "We are taking you to a farm, Dad," Brandon lied smoothly. "A beautiful farm. Tomorrow. But we need to handle some paperwork first." He sat down on the ottoman in front of me, blocking my view of the rest of the room. He leaned in close, his breath smelling of stale coffee and mints. "Dad, listen to me. Tomorrow morning my lawyer is coming over. Mr. Henderson. He is a nice man. He just needs to help us with the house so we can get you to the farm." I nodded slowly, staring at his chin. "The house, yes. Exactly. Now I know your hands are shaking. I saw you drop the statue. So we made it easy for you. You don't even have to sign your name." I paused. This was a new development. "No signature?" I asked, my voice trembling. "No," Brandon said. "Mr. Henderson said that because of your condition, a thumbprint is enough. We will just press your thumb onto the paper. Just a little ink. That is all it takes to get you to safety." I felt a cold rage burning in my stomach. A thumbprint. They were treating me like an illiterate criminal. They wanted to bypass my handwriting because a forensic handwriting expert might testify later that my signature looked forced or shaky. But a thumbprint is definitive. A thumbprint says I was there and I consented. It was the ultimate erasure of my agency. They were rushing. They were cutting corners. "Why?" "Okay," I whispered. "Just a print." "That sounds easy." "Good," Brandon said, patting my knee. He stood up, looking relieved. His shoulders dropped an inch. "We are going to order pizza. You go rest in your room. We have a big day tomorrow." I shuffled to my room, leaning heavily on my cane. I heard them high-five behind my back. Literally high-five. Like they had just scored a touchdown instead of tricking a helpless old man. I went into my room and closed the door. I locked it. Then I sat on the edge of the bed and pulled out my smartphone. I opened the app that Silas had installed. The screen flickered and then split into two feeds. Camera 1 showed the living room. Camera 2 showed the kitchen. I tapped on the kitchen feed. The image was crisp, high definition. I could see the crumbs on the counter. I could see the label on the wine bottle Tiffany was opening. Brandon was pacing. He wasn't celebrating anymore. He was holding his phone, looking at the screen with an expression of pure terror. Tiffany poured herself a glass of wine. "Relax, babe," she said. "He bought it. He thinks he is a teenager again working with his dead brother. He is mush. Tomorrow is a slam dunk." "I know," Brandon snapped, running a hand through his thinning hair. "But Viper keeps texting me. He knows I am home. He sent me a picture of the mailbox, Tiffany. Our mailbox, taken 10 minutes ago." I zoomed in on the screen. Brandon's face was pale, sweaty. Suddenly his phone rang. The sound made him jump. He looked at the screen and froze. "Answer it," Tiffany hissed, taking a sip of wine. "Tell him we have the asset. Tell him 24 hours. Brandon swiped the screen and put the phone to his ear. He put it on speaker. "Hello," he said, his voice cracking. The voice that came out of the speaker was low, distorted, but clear enough for the hidden microphone to pick up. "Hello, Brandon." It wasn't a shout. It was a purr. A dangerous, menacing purr. "I am looking at your house, Brandon. It is a nice house. Flammable. But nice. Look, Viper, please, boo." Brandon stammered, gripping the edge of the counter. "I told you. Tomorrow. My father is signing the deed tomorrow morning. I have a buyer lined up for the afternoon. Cash deal. I will have your money by Friday night." "Friday noon," the voice corrected. "Not Friday night. Noon. I can't. Wire transfers take time." "Noon, Brandon. Or I don't burn the house, I take a finger. Your right thumb, actually. Since you like signing things so much, I figure you won't need it if you can't pay me. Please. Noon. Tick-tock, Brandon." The line went dead. Brandon dropped the phone on the counter. He looked like he was going to throw up. He bent over the sink, dry, heaving. Tiffany walked over and rubbed his back. Not with affection, but with the impatience of a trainer handling a weak horse. "Pull it together," she said. "We are fine. The old man is ready to fold. We get the thumbprint at 9 a.m. We dump him at Sunny Meadows by 10. I have the notary coming at 11 to finalize the house sale. You wire the money to Viper at 12. We are clear." Brandon looked up at her, his eyes bloodshot. What if he resists Tiff? What if he has a moment of clarity? "Then we force him," Tiffany said, picking up a steak knife from the drying rack and examining the blade. "We hold his hand down and we press his thumb to that paper. He is weak, Brandon. He is nothing. We do whatever it takes." I watched them on the small screen of my phone. The glow of the display illuminated my face in the dark room. They were trapped. Cornered animals. And tomorrow morning they were coming for me not with love but with desperation and violence. I turned off the phone. I reached under the mattress and checked the file one last time. The deed transfer. The debt purchase agreement. The evidence on I wasn't afraid anymore. I felt a strange sense of calm. The kind of calm that comes before you demolish a building. You check the charges, you clear the perimeter, and you wait for the countdown. Tomorrow at 9 a.m. they wanted a thumbprint. I would give them something much heavier than ink. I would give them the truth. And it was going to crush them. The storm outside was relentless, battering against the thin glass of my bedroom window, like an angry fist demand to be let in. Thunder rattled the floorboards under my feet, but the turbulence inside my chest was far more violent than anything nature could conjure. I sat on the edge of my narrow, sagging mattress, unable to even close my eyes, let alone sleep. In my hands, I held a small object that felt heavy not in weight, but in meaning. It was my union pin, a circle of tarnished brass given to me 40 years ago for excellence in service. Master Builder, 1985. I rubbed my thumb over the raised letters, feeling the grit of the metal against my callous skin. I had polished this pin every Sunday for 4 decades, but tonight it felt like a relic from a civilization that no longer existed. A civilization where hard work mattered, where a man's word was his bond, and where family was the fortress that protected you from the world, not the enemy waiting inside the gates. In the darkness, illuminated only by the occasional flash of lightning, I allowed myself to do something I had avoided for years. I looked back. I looked back not at the buildings I had raised or the concrete I had poured, but at the boy I had raised. Brandon. I remembered him as a toddler clinging to my leg when I came home covered in dust. I remembered his first little league game where he struck out 3 times and cried in the dugout. I didn't tell him to toughen up. I bought him ice cream. I told him the umpire was blind. I remembered when he crashed his first car, a beat-up Honda I had bought him. He was terrified, shaking like a leaf. I didn't make him pay for the repairs. I took extra shifts on the weekend to cover it so his insurance rates wouldn't go up. I sat there in the dark, and the realization hit me harder than any hammer I had ever swung. I had done this. I had created the monster that was currently sleeping down the hall. I had shielded him from every consequence. I had cushioned every fall. I had taught him that if he broke something, his father would fix it. If he owed money, his father would pay it. I thought I was being a good provider. I thought I was giving him the life I never had, growing up poor in the city. But I wasn't giving him a life. I was taking away his character. I had robbed him of the struggle that makes a man strong. And now, faced with a debt he couldn't pay and a life he couldn't manage, he was doing exactly what I had trained him to do. He was looking for Daddy to fix it. Only this time, fixing it meant selling Daddy down the river. A tear, hot and stinging, rolled down my cheek and splashed onto the brass pin. It wasn't a tear of sadness. It was a tear of shame. I wasn't crying because my son was a traitor. I was crying because I was his architect. The sound of the doorknob turning made me freeze. I shoved the pin under my pillow and hunched my shoulders instantly, slipping back into the role of the frail, confused old man. The door creaked open, slicing a wedge of hallway light across the floor. A silhouette stood there. Brandon. He stepped into the room. He was moving quietly, almost like he was floating. In his hand he held a glass of warm milk. Steam rose from it, curling into the stale air of the room. "Dad," he whispered. His voice was soft, gentle. It was the voice he used when he wanted money. "Are you awake?" I blinked slowly, looking up at him with unfocused eyes. "Brandon. Is it morning? Is the truck here?" "No, Dad, it is still night," Brandon said, stepping closer. "The storm woke you up, huh?" "I couldn't sleep either. I was worried about you." He sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress dipped under his weight. I could smell him. He smelled of scotch and nervousness. His eyes were darting around the room, checking the corners, avoiding my gaze. "I brought you some warm milk," he said, holding the glass out to me. "Mom used to make this for us, remember? Nutmeg and honey. It will help you sleep. You have a big day tomorrow. You need your rest." I looked at the glass. The milk was frothy white and innocent looking. But my instincts, the same instincts that told me when a retaining wall was about to buckle, were screaming at me. Why now? Why the sudden kindness after months of neglect? Why milk when he knew I was lactose intolerant? Something a son who cared would remember. "Thank you, son," I said, my voice trembling. You are a good boy, always taking care of your old man." I reached out with a shaking hand. Brandon watched me intently. His eyes were locked on the glass. There was a hunger in his stare. He wasn't just offering a drink. He was waiting for a result. I brought the glass to my lips. The smell hit me. Under the nutmeg and the honey, there was something else. A chemical bitterness. Acrid and faint but present. My heart hammered against my ribs. What was in this? Sleeping pills. Sedatives to make sure I was compliant for the notary tomorrow. Or was it something worse? Tiffany had talked about my heart medication. She had talked about nature taking its course. I took a sip, just enough to wet my lips, but not swallowing. I let out a long, contented sigh. "It is good," I mumbled, wiping my mouth with the back of my hand. "Just like Mom made." "Drink it all." "Dad." Brandon urged, his voice tight. "It gets cold fast." I need to sit up more," I said, shifting my weight. "My back." "Help me with the pillow, Brandon." Brandon sighed, impatient but compliant. He leaned over me, reaching for the pillow behind my head. For 1 second, his line of sight was blocked by his own body as he reached across. That was all I needed. With a speed that would have surprised a man half my age, I tipped the glass. I didn't pour it on the floor where it would leave a stain. I poured it directly into the pot of the peace lily that sat on my nightstand. The dry soil drank the white liquid instantly. By the time Brandon pulled back, the pillow fluffed. I was bringing the empty glass down from my face, licking my lips. "That was fast," Brandon said, looking at the empty glass with visible relief. "I was thirsty," I said, handing it back to him. "Thank you, son. I feel sleepy already." "Good." Stood up, clutching the empty glass like a trophy. "Go to sleep, Dad. Dream of the farm. Tomorrow everything changes." He backed out of the room and closed the door. I heard the lock click. I lay there in the darkness, my eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. I listened to his footsteps fade down the hall. I listened to the murmur of Tiffany's voice asking if I drank it. I listened to Brandon say yes. I didn't sleep. Not for a minute. I lay there, keeping a vigil over my own life. I thought about the peace lily on the nightstand. It was a hardy plant. I had bought it 5 years ago. I watered it every week. It had survived neglect, cold drafts, and dry spells. It was a survivor. Just like me. The storm raged on for hours, mirroring the tempest in my soul. But eventually, as all storms do, it ran out of rain. The thunder faded into the distance, and the first gray light of dawn began to creep through the window. I sat up. My body was stiff, my joints aching from the dampness, but my mind was razor sharp. I turned to look at the nightstand. The peace lily was dead. It wasn't just wilted. It was destroyed. The vibrant green leaves had turned a sickly yellow-brown. The stems had collapsed, hanging over the side of the pot, like limp noodles. The veins in the leaves were black. Whatever was in that milk, it wasn't just a sleeping pill. It was poison. A high dose of something toxic enough to kill a living thing in a matter of hours. I stared at the dead plant, and I felt the last remaining tether to my old life snap. The Harrison Thorne who forgave his son, who made excuses, who blamed himself for spoiling the boy, that man died in this bed last night. He died when he looked at that glass of milk. I reached out and touched a dead leaf. It crumbled to dust between my fingers. They tried to kill me. My own blood. They didn't just want my money. They wanted my breath. They wanted the space I occupied in the world so they could fill it with their greed. I swung my legs out of bed. I didn't reach for my cane. I stood up on my own 2 feet. The pain was there, but I welcomed it. Pain reminds you that you are alive. And I was very much alive. I walked to the mirror hanging on the back of the door. I looked at the reflection. The gray hair, the wrinkles, the tired eyes. But behind the eyes there was something new. A cold, hard steel that hadn't been there yesterday. I picked up the union pin from under my pillow. I pinned it to the lapel of my pajama shirt. "I am not your father anymore, Brandon," I whispered to the reflection. "I am your reckoning." I looked at the clock. 7 a.m. 2 hours until the notary arrived. 2 hours until they came to collect their prize. I went back to the nightstand and picked up the pot with the dead lily. I wouldn't hide it. I wouldn't throw it away. I was going to keep it. It was evidence. But more than that, it was a reminder. When they walked in here to drag me to the slaughter, they would see this plant. And they would see me. And they would realize too late that they had tried to bury a seed thinking it was a corpse. But seeds grow. And this one was about to break through the concrete and tear their foundation apart. I sat in the chair facing the door, the dead plant on my lap, and I waited. The sun rose, casting long shadows across the room. The silence of the morning was heavy, absolute, and terrifying. It was the silence of a courtroom before the gavel falls. And I was holding the hammer. The clock on the living room wall ticked with the rhythm of a time bomb, counting down to an explosion that only I knew was coming. It was 9 a.m. exactly, and the stage was set for the final act of my family's betrayal. I sat at the head of the dining table, the same table where I had presided over Thanksgiving turkeys and birthday cakes for 30 years. Today, there was no food. There was only a single document sitting on the polished wood, a black ink pad, and a cheap ballpoint pen. The cast of characters had assembled, and they were jittery. Brandon was pacing back and forth near the window, checking his phone every 30 seconds. His face was pale and slick with sweat, the kind of sweat that comes from fear, not heat. I knew he was thinking about the deadline. Noon. 3 hours left until Viper the loan shark made good on his promise to take a thumb as payment. Tiffany sat to my right, drumming her manicured fingernails on the table. She was dressed in a sharp business suit, the kind a woman wears when she is closing a deal. She looked at me not with affection, but with the cold calculation of a butcher eyeing a side of beef. And then there was the third player, the notary. Brandon had introduced him as Mr. Henderson, a respected legal professional, but I knew a con man when I saw one. His name was actually Gary. I had seen him drinking beers with Brandon in the garage a few summers ago. He was a disbarred paralegal who did off-the-books work for cash. He wore a suit that was too shiny and smelled of stale cigarette smoke and desperation. "All right, let us get this over with," Gary said, pulling a handkerchief from his pocket and wiping his forehead. "I have another appointment across town." He was lying. He didn't have another appointment. He just wanted to get paid and get out before the crime was discovered. "Sit up straight, Dad," Brandon commanded, stopping his pacing and coming to stand behind my chair. His hands gripped the back of the wood, his knuckles white. "Mr. Henderson needs to witness your consent." I slumped in the chair, letting my head loll slightly to the left. I kept my mouth slightly open, breathing with a rhythmic wheeze that I had perfected over the last 2 days. Is this the farm?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Are we going to the farm now, Leonard?" Brandon flinched at the name of his dead uncle, but Tiffany rolled her eyes openly. "Yes, Harrison, it is the farm paperwork," she snapped. "Just sign the paper so we can get you to the horses." She pushed the document toward me. It was the durable power of attorney granting Brandon full control over my finances, my medical decisions, and my property. It was a death warrant for my freedom. I looked at the paper. The words swam before my eyes, not because I couldn't read them, but because I chose not to focus. I can't see the lines," I mumbled, patting my pockets with trembling hands. "Where are my spectacles?" "I need my spectacles, Leonard." "Jesus Christ," Tiffany hissed, slamming her hand on the table. "You don't need to read it, Harrison. We read it for you. It just says we love you and want to take care of you. I need my glasses," I insisted, my voice rising in a pitch of panic. "I can't sign. I might sign the wrong line. I might sign my soul away." Brandon groaned, a sound of pure frustration. "They are in the kitchen, Dad. I saw them on the counter." I made a move to stand up, pushing against the table with my weak arms. "I will get them. I will just go get them." "No!" Brandon shouted, pushing me back down into the chair with a force that was unnecessary and cruel. Stay there. Tiffany, get the damn glasses. Tiffany let out a growl of annoyance, but she stood up her chair, scraping loudly against the floor. She marched into the kitchen, her heels clicking like gunshots. While she was gone, Gary the notary leaned in. Look, old-timer, just put your thumb on the pad and press it on the paper. You don't even need the glasses. It is just a thumbprint. Easy peasy. I looked at him. His teeth were yellow and his eyes were shifting. I looked at the ink pad. It was black and open, waiting to stain me. Tiffany returned and shoved my glasses onto my face, roughly hooking them over my ears. There. You can see. Now sign. I adjusted the glasses, peering at the document. I took the pen Gary offered. I held it in my shaking hand, hovering over the signature line. The room held its breath. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. I could hear Brandon's watch ticking. I lowered the pen. The tip touched the paper, and then I let my fingers spasm. The pen slipped from my grip. It clattered onto the table and rolled off the edge, hitting the floor with a soft tap. Oops, I whispered. My hands. They are so slippery today. That is it, Gary shouted, slamming his hand on the table. I don't have time for this nonsense, Brandon. He is incompetent. He can't sign. We need the thumbprint. Just grab his hand and do it. But, Brandon hesitated. If we force him, isn't that illegal, Gary? Who cares? Tiffany screamed, her face twisting into a mask of rage. It is noon, Brandon. Noon. Do you want to lose your thumb or do you want to use his? Grab his hand. Something in Brandon broke. The fear of the loan shark outweighed the love for his father. The last shred of decency he possessed evaporated in the heat of his terror. He reached down and grabbed my right wrist. I am sorry, Dad, he muttered, his voice tight. It is for your own good. He pulled my hand toward the ink pad. His grip was clammy and desperate. Stop, I whimpered feebly, trying to pull back. I don't want to, it hurts. Do it, Brandon, Tiffany yelled, leaning over the table, her eyes wide and manic. Press it down. Brandon yanked my arm harder. He forced my thumb onto the black ink pad. I felt the cold, wet sponge against my skin. Now the paper, Gary commanded, pointing to the line. Brandon lifted my inked thumb and moved it toward the document. This was it, the moment of violation. The moment a son forces his will upon the father who raised him. He pushed my hand down, but my hand didn't move. Brandon frowned. He pushed harder, putting his weight into it. My hand remained suspended in the air 2 inches above the paper. It was as immovable as a steel girder. Brandon looked down, confused. He tried to use both hands to force my wrist down. I didn't budge. The trembling in my arm stopped. The shake in my fingers vanished. I slowly turned my wrist, engaging the forearm muscles that had been built over 50 years of hauling lumber and mixing cement. My arm was not the withered twig he thought it was. It was a piston of iron wrapped in aged skin. Brandon gasped, looking at me. I lifted my head. I didn't look at the paper. I didn't look at Tiffany. I looked straight into my son's eyes. My face changed. The slack jaw tightened. The vacant stare sharpened into a glare that could cut glass. The confused old man evaporated, and in his place sat Harrison Thorne, the man who ran crews of tough men. The man who didn't take disrespect from anyone. Brandon, I said. My voice was not a whisper. It was not a rasp. It was deep, resonant, and steady. It was the voice of the father who used to tell him to clean his room, but with 1,000 times more authority. Brandon's eyes went wide. He tried to pull his hands away, but now I was the one holding him. I rotated my wrist and grabbed his forearm. My fingers dug into his flesh, finding the pressure points. Dad, he stammered. What are you doing? I squeezed. Brandon cried out, dropping to one knee beside the chair. The pain must have been excruciating, but I didn't let go. I held him there, pinned by the strength he had forgotten I possessed. I looked at the notary. Gary was frozen halfway out of his chair, his mouth hanging open. "Sit down, Gary," I commanded without looking at him. Gary sat. He fell back into his chair like his strings had been cut. I turned my gaze to Tiffany. She was standing with her hand over her mouth, her face draining of color. She looked from me to Brandon, realizing with horror that the dynamic had shifted violently. "You wanted a signature," I said to Brandon, my voice calm and terrifying. "You wanted a thumbprint. You wanted to sell my house. You wanted to put me in a cage. Dad, please let go." "You are hurting me," Brandon whined, trying to pry my fingers off. "Hurting you?" I asked, tightening my grip until I felt his radius bone creak. "You tried to poison me last night, Brandon. You put arsenic in my milk. Do you think a squeezed arm compares to murder?" The word murder hung in the air, sucking the oxygen out of the room. Brandon stopped struggling. He stared at me in shock. You knew." "I know everything," I said. I leaned in close, my face inches from his. "I know about the gambling. I know about Viper. I know about the foreclosure. I know about the fake nursing home. And I know about your wife's boyfriend, Mike, and their plan to divorce you once I was dead." Tiffany let out a strangled sound. She backed up, hitting the wall. Brandon turned his head slowly to look at his wife. "Mike," he whispered. "Yeah, Mike," I said, releasing Brandon's arm with a shove that sent him sprawling onto the floor. "The personal trainer. The one she was kissing in your office yesterday while I was hiding in the closet." I stood up. I didn't need the cane. I kicked the chair back, and it fell with a loud clatter. I towered over them. The pain in my back was there, but the adrenaline masked it. I felt 10 feet tall. I picked up the document, the power of attorney. I looked at it, and then I looked at them. I ripped it in half. Then I ripped it again. I let the pieces flutter down onto Brandon's head like confetti at the saddest parade in history. "The game is over," I declared. "The act is done." The room was silent, save for Brandon's ragged breathing and the soft whimper coming from Tiffany. Gary, the notary, looked like he was calculating the distance to the door. And then right on cue, the doorbell rang. It was a sharp, cheerful sound that shattered the tension into a million jagged pieces. Brandon flinched violently, scrambling backward on the floor, like a crab. "No," he screamed, clutching his head. "No, it is Viper. It is noon. He is early. He is going to kill me." He curled into a ball, sobbing, a grown man reduced to a puddle of terror. I looked at the door. I knew who it was, and it wasn't Viper. "Get the door!" "Tiffany," I ordered, pointing a finger at her. She shook her head, tears streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. I can't." "Get the door!" I roared, my voice shaking the walls. She jumped. She stumbled toward the hallway, her legs barely working. She unlocked the deadbolt with fumbling fingers. Brandon was wailing now, rocking back and forth. "Don't open it. Don't open. Please don't open it." Tiffany pulled the door open. The light flooded into the hallway. Standing there was not a thug with a baseball bat. The silhouette framed in the doorway was not the grim reaper my son feared, but to him it must have looked like the angel of death in a 3-piece suit. Mr. Caldwell stepped into the foyer with the kind of authority that sucks the air out of a room. Flanking him were 2 uniformed police officers, their hands resting near their belts, and 4 private security contractors who looked like they chewed gravel for breakfast. Brandon was still huddled on the floor, whimpering about his thumb and the loan shark. He didn't even look up until the heavy boots of the officers echoed on the hardwood. When he finally raised his head and saw the badges, the confusion on his face was absolute. One of the security guards rumbled, blocking his path with a chest the size of a refrigerator. Nobody leaves until Mr. Thorne says they leave. Tiffany had backed up all the way to the sideboard, her hands trembling violently. She looked at the police, then at me, then at the shredded papers on the floor. Her mind was racing, trying to find an angle, a lie, a way out. "Harrison," she choked out, forcing a wobbly smile. "Thank God you called the police. Brandon was going crazy. He was hurting you." "I tried to stop him, officers. I told him not to force his father." I stared at her. The audacity was breathtaking. She was throwing her husband under the bus before the wheels had even stopped turning. I walked over to Mr. Caldwell. I stood tall, my spine straight, the adrenaline masking the ache in my joints. I placed a hand on the lawyer's shoulder. "Gentlemen," I said, my voice filling the room, "allow me to make the introductions. This is Mr. Caldwell. He is my attorney, and he is here to read the will." Brandon blinked, wiping snot from his nose. "The will? But Uncle Leonard is dead. We know he is dead. What does this have to do with anything?" Caldwell opened his leather briefcase. The click of the latches sounded like gunshots in the quiet room. He pulled out a blue folder. "He is not here to read Leonard's will to me, Brandon," I said, looking down at my son. "He is here to read it to you, so you can understand exactly what you just threw away." Caldwell adjusted his glasses. "Mr. Leonard Thorne passed away, leaving his entire estate to his sole surviving brother, Harrison Thorne. The estate includes 2 operational vineyards in Napa Valley, a beachfront property in Malibu, and liquid assets totaling $18.4 million. The number hung in the air. 18.4 million. Brandon's jaw dropped. He looked at me, his eyes wide with shock and greed. 18 million. Dad. You are rich." "I was rich," I corrected him. "I came here yesterday ready to share it with you. I came here ready to pay off your debts, to fix this house, to buy you a future. But then I heard you through the door. I heard you planning to sell me for parts." But Dad, Brandon scrambled to his knees. "We didn't know. If we knew—" "If you knew, you would have treated me better," I interrupted. "And that is the problem, Brandon. You shouldn't need a price tag to treat your father with dignity." Tiffany let out a high-pitched laugh. It sounded manic. 18 million. We are rich. Brandon, do you hear that? We are rich. Harrison, surely you can't be holding a grudge. We were just stressed. We can start over. We can move to Malibu together. I looked at Caldwell and nodded. "Show them the movie." Caldwell pulled a tablet from his bag. He tapped the screen and turned the volume up to maximum. A video started playing. It was black and white, grainy footage from the camera hidden in the office closet. Tiffany's voice filled the room, clear and undeniable. "He won't talk for long. He has a heart condition. If he were to say, miss a few doses. At his age, a heart attack is just nature taking its course." Then the sound of kissing, and the man's voice. "Mike." "What about Brandon?" "Brandon doesn't know anything. I am filing for divorce. I am taking half, and we are going to Cabo." Brandon stared at the screen. He stopped breathing. He watched his wife, the woman he had just assaulted his own father for, plotting his destruction in the arms of another man. He turned his head slowly toward Tiffany. His face was a mask of betrayal so deep it looked like physical pain. "Mike," he whispered. "My trainer. You are sleeping with Mike." Tiffany's face crumbled. That is deep fake," she screeched, pointing a shaking finger at the tablet. "That is AI. Harrison made it up. He is tech-savvy. He is lying." Caldwell swiped to the next file. "And this," he said, holding up a paper, "is the toxicology report from the lab we used this morning. We tested the soil from the peace lily in Mr. Thorne's bedroom. It contained a lethal dose of crushed digoxin and rat poison, enough to stop a man's heart in 2 hours. One of the police officers stepped forward, his hand resting on his handcuffs. Attempted murder, Mrs. Thorne. Conspiracy to commit murder. And we have the recording of you pouring the milk in the kitchen, thanks to the camera in the cabinet. Tiffany screamed. It wasn't a word, it was just a raw sound of terror. She bolted for the back door, her heels slipping on the rug. The officer was faster. He grabbed her arm, spinning her around. She clawed at him, her nails raking his face, but he pinned her against the wall. The sound of the handcuffs ratcheting shut was the sweetest music I had ever heard. It was him, she shrieked, thrashing against the restraint. It was Brandon. He gave him the milk. I just watched. It was his idea. He wanted the money for the loan shark. Arrest him. Brandon didn't even fight. He sat on the floor, staring at nothing. He looked like a man whose soul had been surgically removed. I walked over to him. I cast a long shadow over his slumped form. There is one last piece of business, I said. Caldwell handed me a thick stack of papers. I threw them onto the floor in front of Brandon. He looked at them dully. What is this? He mumbled. That I said is your mortgage and your credit card statements and the promissory note you signed to Viper. Brandon looked up, confusion warring with fear. Viper. You know Viper. I bought the debt, Brandon. I said, my voice cold and hard. I used the trust fund to pay off every single cent you owe. Viper has his money. The bank has their money. Brandon's eyes filled with tears. Dad, you paid it. You saved me. Oh God, thank you. I knew you loved me. I knew you wouldn't let them hurt me. He reached out to grab my leg to hug me. I stepped back. I didn't pay it to save you, I said. I paid it to own you. Brandon froze. What? I am the creditor now, I said. I own the note on this house. I own the note on your car. And I own the $200,000 you borrowed from the mob. And unlike the bank, I don't offer grace periods. Caldwell stepped in. Mr. Thorne is calling in the loans, Brandon. All of them. Immediately. Since you have no assets and no income, we are initiating foreclosure proceedings on this house effective this afternoon. You have 1 hour to vacate the premises. Brandon looked around the room where he had planned my demise. 1 hour, but where will I go? I don't know, I said, shrugging. Maybe you can go to Sunny Meadows. I hear they have a bed open in the indigent ward. It is cheap. And they have a patio. Brandon burst into tears, ugly racking sobs that shook his whole body. He crawled forward on his hands and knees. He grabbed the hem of my trousers, burying his face in the fabric. Dad, please. I am sorry. I am so sorry. She made me do it. I was scared. I am your son. Please don't do this. I love you. Don't leave me with nothing. I looked down at the man sobbing at my feet. I looked for the little boy I had carried on my shoulders. I looked for the teenager I had taught to drive. But all I saw was the man who squeezed my arm until the bone creaked. All I saw was the man who handed me a glass of poison and told me to drink up. I pulled my leg away from his grasp. I brushed the dust off my trousers. I leaned down close to his ear so he wouldn't miss a single word. You are looking for your father, I whispered. But he is not here. You killed the forgiving father last night, Brandon. You poisoned him with that milk, and you crushed him with that thumbprint. I stood up and turned my back on him. The man standing in front of you is just your creditor, and your debt is due. I walked toward the door. Take him away, officers, I said. Get them both out of my sight. I walked out onto the porch into the fresh morning air. The storm had passed. The sun was shining. Behind me I heard the wail of my son and the cursing of his wife, but I didn't look back. I had a lot of work to do. I had a house to sell and a new life to build. And for the first time in a long time, I felt completely free. I watched from the porch as the flashing lights of the police cruiser painted the neighborhood in spasms of red and blue. It was a spectacle that had drawn the neighbors out from behind their curtains, the same neighbors who had ignored me for years when I walked with my cane down the sidewalk. Now they watched with open mouths as Tiffany was led down the driveway. She was not going quietly. The composed businesswoman who planned murders over spreadsheets was gone. In her place was a desperate creature kicking and screaming. She shouted that it was a mistake, she shouted that she was being framed, and in a final act of cowardice she shouted that Brandon had forced her to do it. When the officer guided her head into the back of the squad car and slammed the door, the silence that followed felt heavy like the air after a thunderclap. I turned my gaze to Brandon. He was not in handcuffs, but he looked like a prisoner of war. He was standing by his leased BMW, holding a small cardboard box that Mr. Caldwell had graciously allowed him to pack. Inside were his clothes, a few toiletries, and a framed photo of himself. He looked at the car, then he looked at me. "I am taking the car, Dad," he mumbled, reaching for the door handle. "I need to get to a hotel." I shook my head slowly. "You are not listening, Brandon. I told you I own the debt. That includes the lease on the BMW. You haven't made a payment in 4 months. That car belongs to the financing company, and by extension right now, it remains on this property until the repo man comes." Brandon's hand froze on the handle. He looked at me with the eyes of a child who has just been told Santa Claus is dead. "But how am I supposed to leave?" "You have legs," I said, pointing to the sidewalk. "Use them. They are the only things you own that aren't leveraged to the hilt." He looked down at his expensive Italian loafers shoes that were not made for walking. He looked at the long road stretching out of the subdivision. "Dad, please," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I have nowhere to go, no money, no friends. Everyone I know was through Tiffany or the business." I reached into my pocket and pulled out my wallet. It was an old leather thing, cracked and worn. I pulled out a single $20 bill. I walked down the steps and tucked it into the breast pocket of his blazer. "There is a bus station 3 miles east," I said. "A ticket to the city is $12. That leaves you $8 for a meal. It is more than you were going to leave me. You were going to leave me with a bed in a ward that smelled of urine and a cup of poisoned milk." I stepped back. "Goodbye, Brandon." He stood there for a long minute, tears streaming silently down his face. He waited for me to crack. He waited for the father who had bailed him out of every mess since kindergarten to emerge and write a check. But that father was gone, buried under the betrayal of the last 48 hours. When he realized I wasn't moving, he turned around. Shoulders slumped, dragging his feet. He began the long walk down the driveway. He looked small. He looked defeated. And as I watched him disappear around the corner, I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't joy. There is no joy in destroying your own son, no matter how necessary it is. It was a hollow ache, a vast emptiness where my family used to be. But inside that emptiness, there was peace. The kind of peace you feel after you cut out a gangrenous limb. It hurts, but you know the poison has stopped spreading. I walked back inside. Mr. Caldwell and the security team were packing up their equipment. "Good work, gentlemen," I said. Mr. Caldwell looked at me with concern. "Are you all right, Harrison? It is a lot for one day." "I am fine," I said, and I meant it. "Send the invoice for your services, Caldwell, and add a 20% bonus for the security team." They were professional. Caldwell nodded. "And the house, sell it," I said, looking around the living room. "Sell it as is. Furniture, curtains, dishes. Sell it all. I don't want a single teaspoon from this life. Give the proceeds to the local animal shelter." I walked into my bedroom and picked up the only thing I was taking with me. The pot with the dead peace lily. I would keep it, not as a trophy, but as a compass, a reminder of the direction I must never go again. 3 months later, the air tasted different. It didn't taste of exhaust and rain like Chicago. It tasted of dust, sun-dried earth, and sweet grapes. I stood on a ridge overlooking the Napa Valley. The sun was setting, painting the rows of vines in gold and violet. I leaned on a new cane, one made of polished oak that felt solid in my hand. My limp was still there, and the arthritis still woke me up on damp mornings, but my face had color in it for the first time in years. Below me, on a flat plateau of land that used to be scrub brush, a construction site was buzzing with activity. Framers were walking the top plates of walls, hammers swinging in a rhythm that sounded like music to my ears. Concrete mixers churned, saws whined. I adjusted my hard hat and started walking down the hill. "Hey, boss!" A young foreman waved at me. He was a big guy, tattooed arms covered in sawdust. He didn't look at me like I was a fragile old relic. He looked at me like I was the man who signed the checks and knew how to read a blueprint. "We are ready for the inspection on Unit 4, Mr. Thorne," he shouted. I walked over, stepping over a pile of lumber with surprising agility. I ran my hand over the framing of the doorway. It was solid. True. "Good work, Rodriguez," I said. "Make sure the wheelchair ramps are graded correctly. These men fought for their country. I don't want them struggling to get into their own living rooms." This was my project. Leonard's legacy. I hadn't spent the $18 million on yachts or sports cars. I had kept enough to live comfortably to ensure I would never be a burden to anyone again. But the rest was going here. The Thorne Veteran Housing Initiative. That was what the sign out front said. Small, dignified cottages for aging veterans who had no family and no place to go. Men like me who had been discarded by the world. They would live here for free. They would have a garden. They would have a workshop. And they would have dignity. I walked through the skeleton of what would be the community center. I could imagine them here playing cards, telling stories, sharing the bond of brotherhood that blood relatives often failed to provide. I had lost a family of 3 people who shared my DNA, but I was building a family of 50 people who shared my values. I sat down on a stack of drywall and took a sip from my water bottle. I looked out at the vineyard Leonard had loved so much. I finally understood why he stayed away. He wasn't hiding. He was building something real. I thought about Brandon sometimes. Caldwell told me he was working as a dishwasher in a diner in Jersey trying to dodge the creditors I hadn't bought out. I didn't feel the urge to call him. He was on his own journey now. Maybe hitting rock bottom would teach him the lessons I had failed to teach him at the top. Or maybe it wouldn't. Either way, it was no longer my burden to carry.